Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full-on, your Fulham-centric football podcast. I'm your host, Ash Woolford. Joining me on this international break weekend is the full team. Drew, how you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, mate. It's like I haven't been away.
AJ, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Good.
Mozza, how you doing, mate?
I am radiant, sir. Radiant.
It's a new T-shirt, but that's fine. Look, there's no football this weekend. Obviously, we're all going to have to go through the blues of no Fulham on the weekend, or if you want to be super positive, no Fulham to ruin your weekend. We do have a big game, obviously, next weekend to look forward to in the FA Cup quarter-final with Crystal Palace, and we'll talk about that on next week's episode. Why we have a week off, it's probably a good time for us to take stock a bit, look at a couple of things that have happened so far this season, but let's look at the 10 remaining fixtures that we have this season. Hopefully, 11 or 12 remaining fixtures we have left of this season. Let's talk about a few things that we want to see. You know, some things we'd love to see from Marco, a few things we'd like to see from the team in that time. There's some big games coming up. So there's a lot to discuss in terms of, potential players getting minutes and, some players maybe getting a few resting games, but we'll talk about it. There's obviously 10 games left of the season, starting with Crystal Palace in the FA Cup on Saturday week. It's a big game, obviously. Drew, an opportunity to get to an FA Cup semi-final and get to Wembley is massive, right? Most of us have spent most of our lives as Fulham fans going, we don't have realistic hopes of ever winning the Premier League because of what it is and the way it's set up, but it's been most of our dreams to see Fulham play at Wembley in an FA Cup final, unless you are lucky enough to be one of those that are over the age of 50 and would have done it when we got there in 1975. It's a big deal to try and get through these next couple of games because with the way the FA Cup's fallen this year and the way that the teams that are left, we're probably not going to get a better chance than this to push on. What do you think about the Palace game coming? How important is it for us to sort of definitely make sure that we ride through it?
Well, I mean, you're in theory 3 wins from winning the FA Cup. That's where you're at, and that's what you're talking about. So, for a team like Fulham, I mean, it's massive. I mean, it really is. Palace is going to be very tough, as we saw a couple of weeks ago when they beat us at the Cottage. But I'm hopeful that. I'm still with the mindset, perversely enough, that the last round was bigger for me simply because Manchester United have beaten us twice this season completely undeservedly, and we beat them on their own patch in a shootout, which I was really pleased with. But no, in terms of, let's dream a bit. Forget about the quarterfinal and the semi-final. Let's just imagine we won the whole damn thing. What it would do to the club in terms of, raising its profile, entry into Europe. It would obviously enable us, hopefully, to attract a high quality of player. It would, I would hope, convince Silva that he can win things here. Because obviously, after beating Spurs at the weekend, the papers have been in overdrive about Postecoglou being sacked and who may replace him. Silva's name's always in the frame. So for lots of reasons, I think it's with the greatest respect, Ash, I think it's bigger than just beating Palace. I think we've got to go all in to try and win the whole damn thing because I think it could put us on a whole new level. And you're quite right. I mean, Palace are difficult, Man City are difficult, but there's no one in the remaining teams that I'm sitting there thinking that we're just going to get blown away by. So, as hard as Palace will be, I think we need to be focusing on, aiming to win the whole thing. That's personally what I think.
Yeah, look, we're fighting on two fronts realistically at the moment. We're very rare as a Fulham fan you get to say that because we obviously have a great chance of making it into Europe through our league standing as well as the FA Cup. AJ, it's hard to not sit there and go, oh, let's put all our eggs in the FA Cup basket because we all really want to see Fulham win an FA Cup at some point in our lifetime. It'd be really nice if it could happen, right? But when you look at what's left of the league, you know, what would you prefer? You know, are you happy just as long as we get into Europe at the end of the season? You know, because that in itself will probably give us another year of Marco Silva. God knows what it will mean for a team, and we'll discuss that, you know, as that happens, if it happens. But, you know, what's more important here? Just getting to Europe or forget the league, the FA Cup? Like, that's all that really matters. Like, what are your sort of feelings at the moment?
Our priority's got to be whatever the next game is in front of us, and right now that's the FA Cup. So our priority's got to be the FA Cup. Say disaster strikes and we get knocked out of that, then we've got another question to ask after that. But as of this moment, our biggest and highest priority is our next game, which is the FA Cup quarter final against Crystal Palace. Even if the fixtures were flipped and we had the game against Arsenal before the game against Crystal Palace, I'd still likely be saying that because it's a cup quarter final. It's, as Drew alluded to, it's 3 games away from silverware. It's not something to be taken lightly. If there were 10 or 5 or 4 fixtures before the FA Cup game, then I'd be talking differently and say we've got to focus on what's ahead of us. We have 4 league games we need to play. We can't just set them aside because we've got the cup game coming up. But that's not the situation. The situation is the cup game is next. That needs to be our biggest and highest priority. I will take beating Crystal Palace and going to an FA Cup semi-final if it means losing against Arsenal and Liverpool, which on paper is considered likely anyway. But I would trade both of those games for beating Palace in this situation. Then there'll be another question afterwards of when the semi-final is, who we've got in the semi-final, our odds of getting past them, and how important that game is to us compared to other league games. Realistically, putting our eggs into the cup basket and our remaining fixtures, we should be expecting points from Southampton, Bournemouth, Everton, and Brentford at the very least. Maybe not necessarily
Yeah.
3 points, but points.
Yeah, look. Let's forget about Palace for a minute. Let's forget about the FA Cup. You know, as much as because we're going to do much debating and doting about it next week when we do our preview of the Palace game because it is a massive game for the club, right? Mozza, we've got 9 league games left of the season, right? We're currently sat in 8th place. You know, 4 points off of a top 4 finish, which isn't even out of the bloody question when you think about it. That there's 9 games left of the season. We're talking about Fulham being 4 points off of 4th place. That's mental. When you think about it, but you know, realistically, we're only 2 points off of 6th, and like we're 2 points off of 6th, we're 3 points off of 5th. It's really close at the top of the table, and somehow at the moment we're not the team being mentioned by people about making it into Europe this season. There's been an awful lot of talk this week about the scenarios around England and the Premier League potentially getting 11 places in Europe on certain things that go around, and a lot of chatter about Bournemouth winning the FA Cup and finishing Europa League place, and that therefore gives that another spot. But at no point in any of those conversations have Fulham been mentioned once. It's slightly frustrating for me that we're in 8th place. We haven't been out of the top half of the table in 4 months. Arguably, forget Liverpool because they are the best team in the league by far, and Forest probably. We're one of the most consistent teams in the league. Yeah, we are we're 8th place, but unlike most other teams in the league, we haven't had massive spells of constantly winning games and then massive losing streaks. We've only lost 2 games. Maximum games we've lost in a row in the league this season is 2. There are lots of games that we can sit there and we can be frustrated about that we should have done better and we should have got more points at. But not even looking at the games we've got back to the season, we should be really proud of the fact that we're in 8th where we are at the moment, but not as a way of sitting back on that and using that as let's pat ourselves on the back and go for it. It needs to be the fire, right, to go forward and push ourselves in these last game seasons, because there is some massive games. April is a massive, massive month for us in the league. With Arsenal away, Liverpool at home, Bournemouth away, Chelsea at home, and then Southampton away. There's some massive games in April, right? So we really need to get ourselves in a position where we're prepared for a dogfight to make sure that we get the rewards that I think our season deserves in finishing in Europe.
I agree. I think we do deserve to finish in Europe. Do I expect us to finish in Europe? No. However, at the beginning of the season, if you'd asked me, where do you think we will be at this very date, at this very time of recording, and then you told me we'll be in 8th place and Europe's up for grabs, you're in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, I would have bitten your hand off. I know you said let's forget about the FA Cup for a minute, or what's more important. So focusing on the league, and with the remaining games left, we don't expect to beat, as it were, the top 6. So, but as you just said, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, but Chelsea and Man City. I mean, yeah, we beat Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Another historic moment this season for us. We've got them at home. It's achievable. Man City last game of the season. It's not impossible to score against them. They don't often keep clean sheets. Yes, they often do comebacks. Yes, they often get given penalties for whatever and make these certain comebacks and win games. But with the season that they've had, again, not impossible. Liverpool at home, yeah, you might write that off. Us away to Arsenal, you might write that off. The rest of those games we've got there, I'll say that, sorry, maybe Villa away might be a tough one, might be a loss. But the rest of those games that we've got there, I think they're all very achievable wins. They're all 3-pointers. And I say that we look at things on paper, best laid plans of mice and men gang after glay, as the saying goes. I'm not too sure, but I don't think we would finish in the top 4. At best, and this is me being optimistic, I think we could get 6th place, but you've got teams like Forest having a very, very good season. But I don't see why we can't be a team like that, if not this season or the next. I would very much hope to finish above the likes of Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, and Palace. But those spaces, between 4th place, and I'm looking at the table now just so I can sort of work it out in my head. You look at between 4th place and 12th place. That could sort of go either way for us, but I think we're going to finish in the top half. I know you're not asking for a prediction, but I think we will be there or thereabouts where we are, maybe 7th. I think we could get a 6th place finish, and I think that is what we deserve, and that at least is what we should be aiming for. Aim high.
Yeah, look, Drew, look at, I don't know if you've got the table up in front of you, you can see it, but with the games left this season, potentially, there's 12, I reckon 12 points left for us in this league. Like, if you look at it on paper, we might get a couple of shock results there. I see, if we're lucky, 12 points in this league table left for us now. If you look at the league and you see that, if you add 12 points onto where we are at the moment, would 57 points be enough to get us into Europe? Would you hope the 57 points would be enough to get us into Europe? It's really hard to tell because, as Mozza said, the league table is ridiculously tight between 4th and 12th. But what should we realistically want league-wise for the rest of the season?
Well, 57 would not get us in the last 3 seasons. We would need... Oh, no, sorry, I lied. 21-22, it would have probably got us in. Because West Ham got in on 56. Europe's that real double-edged sword, as we've talked about briefly, and I know we'll talk more about this in the off-season. I think if we got into Europe as we are now with the squad we've got, we could have a real struggle on our hands in terms of our league form. I mean, I'd love to get into Europe, but I do wonder if it might be a season too soon. And there's me just talking about winning the FA Cup. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm not as optimistic as Mozza. I'm not sure we're a top 6 team, top 7 team. If we finished 8th where we are now, I think the beginning of the season, if you'd have told me we finished 8th, I'd have taken that because it's clear signs of progress. But the one thing I think we might be overlooking here, Ash, is that we perform better against teams in the top half of the table than we do the bottom half.
It's really true.
So I think we might steal a few more points than we're expecting. I mean, Arsenal barely scraped past Chelsea, and they haven't got a striker to speak of. They've only lost 3 games all season, but they've drawn 10. Chelsea are beatable. Who the hell knows how Liverpool are going to react when they've just lost 2 chances of silverware in the space of about 8 days. Obviously, we got Man City at home on the last game of the season, but by then it could all be over by the shouting. So, yeah, I mean, if we ended up with 57 points, AJ, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that'll be our highest ever points total in the Premier League.
It would be correct.
Yeah, that in itself is a massive achievement. So as much as I want to win the FA Cup, I'm a bit sceptical about what happens after that in terms of how we cope with Europe. Because unless you boys know something I don't, I'm not convinced the Khans are going to put in a lot of money to sustain a proper assault on Europe whilst simultaneously making sure we don't collapse under the weight of the fixtures and find ourselves inadvertently in a relegation dogfight, which, we could see happening. So, yeah, 57 points I'll be more than happy with finishing 8th.
Yeah, look, let's be realistic, AJ. And you look at, there's potentially 3 European competitions available to us, right? If you had to pick one to get into, what would you prefer? And I know that might sound nuts for people sitting there going, you have an opportunity in the Champions League, surely that's where you want to be. But if we got into the Champions League, we wouldn't compete. We have to be realistic. We would not be competing with that to go through. But Europa League, would it be nice to get a third bite of that cherry to potentially sort of do something there, or would you rather be in the Conference League, which looks a lot easier to maybe get far into it? And who doesn't want a Thursday night in Moldova? Let's be honest. But realistically, if you look at it, what would be a preference for you if we could make it Europe, of which one of those competitions that we would get into?
It's the Champions League. There's not even a question about it. I don't care if we don't compete. The financial gain and the historic value of Fulham being a Champions League football club. There's no question about it. I don't care if we lost every single game of the Champions League. We would be going into stadiums with that anthem playing. Craven Cottage would be on Tuesday, Wednesday night football. It is unthinkable. It has to be the Champions League. I'm sorry. I understand there's a more realistic shot of us winning the Conference League and lifting the same trophy that West Ham lifted a couple of seasons ago, or going into the Europa League and putting a good fight until we come across a European giant somewhere down the lines. Yeah, no, Champions League. I'm sorry. I might sound stupid in saying that, but as a Fulham fan that may never see that day happen ever again, it has to be the Champions League.
No, there's no sounding silly about it. For me, it's more just a case of, I'm getting a taste of success under Marco Silva. It's kind of nice to, see that success, and I just don't know if getting pumped, 7 goals against Barcelona would be great, or if we can sit
we've
there and
got a
go,
habit of
actually, fuck the scoreline. if we get to play at the new camp, we get to play at the new camp. Let's all go to Barcelona. But it's one of those ones that it's just, do we want to win stuff, or do we want, or do we want to be financially, set up for ages? The problem with the Champions League is we saw it with Leicester. They had a season in the Champions League, and they made a lot of money for doing so, but they were a Championship club 2.5 years later. So it's one of those ones where, it'd be
They
great.
also won a
Don't get me
trophy.
wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong. It would be absolutely amazing to get into the Champions League, and they have that opportunity. It's just more of a case for me of that. Would you rather have another realistic opportunity to win a tournament, a competition? Because we wouldn't have a chance to win the Champions League. But who knows? We could always be one of those clubs that do well enough to, do a Chelsea and drop down to Champions League afterwards. Drop down from the Champions League to Europa League. Who knows? It's one of those things. Lads, that's that. There's a lot to discuss here. We got a lot of big games coming up, and we will be previewing every single game as we always do, coming up as they come up, and we'll discuss. And there's going to be many changes in the league, and discussion about what may or may not happen at the end of the season is going to change, I imagine, many times in the rest of the season coming up. Let's enjoy the weekend off, all of us. No Fulham there to ruin it. We've got a big game coming up next week against Palace in the FA Cup quarterfinal. We'll preview that next week. Obviously, everyone who's watching this, we will preview that as we'll give that game the attention it needs, because it's a massive game for both clubs, and I think that could really fit into the type of game that we get. Lads, again, thanks very much for joining me on this one. I hope you all have a great weekend. I hope everyone watching has a great weekend. Thank you, everyone who's been supporting the show of late. We've gained quite a few followers over the last couple of weeks. It's been great. Everyone who's been messaging us in about certain subjects to do with the club. It's been lovely to have some interaction with you. Please do keep commenting on our videos and liking and subscribing and sharing the channel, because the growth is brilliant and it is nice to have. Other than that, I'll see you all next week as we come to preview the FA Cup quarterfinal. And come on, you Whites.